Good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Kantan Shankar, and I am the manager in the Fragile Conflict and Violence Unit. Welcome to the Fragility Forum. And this session is on prioritizing recovery and peace building in crisis response. I think you all heard the president even in his opening statement, he was talking about the importance of partnership. And subsequently, the other speakers too also highlighted the partnership between the different actors. There was also a clear recognition that from the agenda is so big that that we would, as an institution, the World Bank Group needs to work very closely with the partners. I think this whole issue on partnership and an issue on this post-conflict needs assessment is framed as part of this 2008 joint declaration on crisis and post-crisis response between the partnership between the EU, the UN, and the World Bank. My personal experience, going back to 1993, just after the post-Oslo Accords, where there was this huge 7-volume study which was done, and I went to West Bank and Gaza, and I was based there from '95, and I really realized the importance. I mean, the 7-volume study was so huge, you could lift weights with it, and we have come quite a long way in terms of the whole overall needs assessment. More recently, too, as the country manager in Myanmar, kind of realized the importance of the PCNA, which was undertaken in terms of looking at how the Myanmar government would work with the ethnic groups. So with that introduction, I just wanted to introduce you to a very distinguished panel which we have today. What is very interesting is that listening to our clients from the field. So we have our clients from both Nigeria and from Ukraine, and then we also will have reflections on this partnership on the UN, World Bank, and EU partnership on the PCNA from my colleague, Stan. So why don't we start with the first presenter. This is Dr. Mariam Masha. Dr. Masha is a senior special assistant to the President of Nigeria on internally displaced persons in the Office of the Vice President, who plays a very strategic role in the plan of the federal government of Nigeria for the reconstruction and rehabilitation of the Northeast zone affected by Boko Haram insurgency. Before this, Dr. Masha served as the senior special assistant to the governor of Lagos State on transport education, where she worked on transport sector reform through human capacity development. And Archbishop Tutu Leadership Fellow of the African Leadership Institute, as well as she's the fellow of the Nigerian Leadership Institute. Miriam still recently served as the member of the core group of the WHO Violence and Injury Prevention Mentorship Program. Miriam is a dentist with a master's degree in public health from the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health and a postgraduate diploma in organizational leadership from the Said Business School, Oxford University. With that introduction, over to Dr. Masha.
Thank you very much. There we go. Yeah, good evening, everybody. I'd like to, first of all, start by thanking the organizers for the opportunity to be here to learn and also share the experience that Nigeria is facing with all of us. Nigeria is currently challenged by the insurgency in the northeast of the country, which has led to forced displacement of a significant number of people in that region. But listening to the president of the World Bank earlier today, and as he spoke about the new thinking of the World Bank, and which is basically an appreciation for conflict management, peace building, and in crisis response, it actually speaks very much to how the recovery and peace building assessment has been designed for Nigeria and is being conducted in Nigeria today. So I would start by going through a bit of a background as to what the situation is in the northeast as part of Nigeria. The northeast part of Nigeria has 6 states that has been affected by the insurgency, and this has resulted in a significant human casualty, as well as diminished livelihoods, destruction of property and infrastructure. And it's led to the death of over tens of thousands of Nigerians that have lost their lives, and these would have otherwise been productive Nigerians, with about 1.8 million people also displaced internally as a result of this insurgency, also leaving about 170,000 Nigerians seeking refuge in neighboring countries outside of Nigeria. Of course, the socioeconomic impact is beyond just the 6 states in that region. It affects not just the northern part of the country, but also the country as a whole, if one considers the fact that that region is where there's a lot of agriculture. So with the impact of insurgency, it's being felt all over the country. The conflict is being managed, and it's being managed by military interventions and some other interventions as well, supporting the humanitarian crisis in that region. But it's become necessary to address the immediate vulnerability through programs designed to meet the human needs and improve service delivery and restore livelihoods. As a consequence of that, the Recovery and Peace Building Assessment has been embarked upon by the federal government of Nigeria and led by the federal government of Nigeria in partnership with the World Bank, the European Union, and the United Nations under or within the framework of the joint EU World Bank and the UN Declaration on International Crisis Recovery. The fact that Nigeria is leading this assessment is significant for a number of things, because it presents a strategic platform for the engagement of all the key players. And when we're talking about the key players beyond just the 3 partners here, but within the state governments, among the state governments, across with the federal and the local governments. And so the federal government driving this, and with the office of the vice president taking the lead on this, demonstrates the political will for the country and also inspires the states to also take ownership and take this rather seriously. The Recovery and Peace Building Assessment is a systematic assessment of the physical, social, and the economic impact of the crisis. It also addresses the needs of the region, as well as the short to medium strategies or recovery strategies for the interventions. It provides and informs a collective vision for the strategy on peace building and recovery, and also provides a framework for the coordinated and coherent support, both from the government of Nigeria as well as the donors and development partners and humanitarian partners. In terms of where we are, the RPBA began with the scoping mission in September, and this essentially assisted in defining what the objectives are, what our scope will be, what it is that we're looking for. And we were able to identify 3 components, which basically I will get into as we go on. But just to touch on quickly were the infrastructure, social cohesion, and peace building, as well as looking at the economy. It also helped that particular period to define what geographical areas we'll be looking at. Was it just the conflict-affected states, or conflict-affected and displacement-affected states? And what we decided to do was to go with the whole region, looking at both the conflict-affected states as well as the displacement-affected states. Then we moved to starting, at that phase as well, we were also able to engage the state government and the federal government, and this was also very important in how we proceeded. And working with the states was getting the buy-in from the state governors and their governments to take ownership of this, because even though it's being led by the federal government, the states is where the impact is actually felt. Because what is the federal at the end of the day? People are in different states, so it was important to get their buy-in. So moving on to the mobilization and the detailed assessment phase, this began with the launch of the process where we gathered the stakeholders from the different states, the sector leads, when we looked at each of the different components that we're assessing, and we brought in the sector leads as well, and went through the methodology and examined the tools that would be used and agreed on how the process would go. This was followed very quickly by a field mission to the 6 states, where we're able to meet with the governments of the different states that we went to, also had direct interaction and engagements with the IDP communities themselves, because it's not about just what the plan is for them, but also it's important to hear from them what it is that their own needs are as well. Working with the private sectors in those areas and civil society and a host of other players. And we also just concluded a technical meeting, which was a validation, because the primary findings have been gathered together and some analysis done. And we also shared this with the state focal people and their representatives to kind of validate that process. And we just rounded that up now. So where we are is moving quickly to the validation and consensus building phase, where we'll be reviewing the report, that's a synthesis report, and sharing this as well among the states and the federal government. The last part of this, in terms of the sequencing, is what begins to happen after the assessment has been completed. And this is as critical, if not more critical, than just completing the assessment, because we wouldn't want to have a fine report that just sits on a shelf, but it should be something that will be instrumental in actually moving forward and addressing the needs and the challenges being faced. The post-RPBA phase, we would also be using this opportunity to seek the continued support of our partners in implementing this, because this phase is where we'll go into detailed planning, financing, and also the development of the institutional framework to implement the process. So it's a critical process, and it's something that we would be working as hard as we have worked on the RPBA itself, if not more. In terms of the methodology, what we did was to review existing government frameworks, because quite a bit of work had been done in the past at the state level and as well as the federal level. And it was important to see what had been done, what gaps existed, and that actually informed how we moved forward. Also, we were able to review existing literature on the impact of the conflict as well as the other initiatives, then going into detailed infrastructure, social, and economic impact analysis. This was supported by remote sensing in areas where it was hard to reach to get data. This whole process was then followed closely by a needs analysis of the impacts that we were able to analyze from the part before. And then, of course, as mentioned earlier, the field missions to the different state governments and the validation process, which is oncoming. Now, what makes this different is the integrated approach to the assessment, which of course will translate into an integrated approach to the recovery process and strategy itself, and not to look at each one of these in isolation, but to see how they work hand in hand in terms of the assessment and in terms of what the recovery strategy would be. And what we've been able to do is learn from the work that had been done and the experiences in other countries that have experienced similar things, and adapt that to the Nigerian context. And interestingly is the fact that this is not actually a post-crisis or post-conflict. This is actually still, for lack of a better way to describe it, in conflict, where we're still managing the situation. And so looking at this, it was a 3-tier approach, which looks at 3 different components. That's one is the infrastructure and social services. The second is peace building, stability and social cohesion, and then the economic recovery, while also taking into consideration cross-cutting issues, gender, human rights, and governance. And interestingly is the fact that all of this is an integrated and holistic approach to looking at the conflict and displacement affected populations, and not just looking at sectors, but actually considering this together. So again, looking at component 1, which speaks to infrastructure and social services, a significant amount of work was done with about 66 data sets collected and analyzed. This is looking at 11 sectors that were picked, ranging from health, education, agriculture, and this was in all the 6 states, so a 66 data sets. And what we know is that for us to have the IDPs return, or to have some stability wherever it is that they are, sustainable restoration and improvement of infrastructure is important. So the strategies would involve the support of the different, whether it's policy or the different interventions, even up to social safety nets, expanding that, and social protection. Now, the second component, which is peace building, stability, and social cohesion, I think is the most critical component, because this actually forms the foundation for the effective implementation of the whole process. In itself, it's important that this area is understood, what are the drivers of the conflict, and once we understand that, to address that. But importantly is to also note that this part of it is also critical and would inform how successful we are in interventions in the other 2 components. So this speaks to truth and reconciliation, it speaks to justice system, and it would now inform the safe and voluntary return of and resettlement of the IDPs where they are. So looking at the way forward. Did I? Yeah. I did? Oh, component 3, I'm sorry. I thought I'd gone through that. So this actually speaks to economic stabilization of which would favor the return of IDPs. So if we had improved livelihoods and we had employment, and also the strengthening of financial institutions as well as private sector, these are some of the things that we inform the return or resettlement of the IDPs and rehabilitation where they are. So the way forward, looking at the institutional framework and the recovery strategy, it's important to know that the process that we've undertaken or that we are undertaking is looking at short to medium term interventions, not the long term to begin with. And so it's looking at stabilization and recovery over the next 2 years. And even though they're written and they appear to be separate, it's something that would go on at the same time, complementing each other. It's also going to build upon the existing humanitarian interventions, because that is going on. There's still a huge humanitarian need, but it's also important to begin to stabilize for stabilization and recovery. So we're building on the existing interventions, humanitarian interventions, and would ensure that there's complementarity and synergy across the 3 of them, and also building on the existing interventions by the government. And again, it's also this also speaks to the fact that there's a need for that support for the development of an institutional framework to actually ensure that this takes place. So it's to work as hard, if not more, than we are doing right now during the RPBA phase. Now, our recovery strategy, I'll touch on this, running through this very quickly, is rather wordy, but our focus will be on the restoration of social cohesion and trust. That's important for us to have stabilization. We're going to also be looking at addressing the drivers of the conflict. We've spoken earlier to the integrated approach to the recovery, and which will also be in a gradual and incremental phases. It's also important to know that it's a very fluid situation. So it's not in boxes or cast in stone, because it's still in conflict, if you'd like. So that's also something to take into consideration. And also knowing that the different states, though they're all affected, they are different degrees to which this is. There are some that are affected directly by the conflicts, and those that are affected by the by the displacement from other states into them. And all the states have their different peculiarities, so it's important to take that into consideration and make sure that the interventions and the recovery strategies are actually tailor-made to meet the needs as much as we're looking at the whole region as one block. And we're also going to be looking at developing the capacity for institutional, capacity for the institutional framework for the recovery strategies, and ensure that there's collaboration among the state governments and the federal government and essentially the stakeholders that are key players in this. One of the things that we've been able to do rather successfully is ensure that there's a close coordination amongst the key players. It's been tough because the time frame is very short and tight, but we are also aware of the fact that people are getting assessment fatigue. Everyone wants an intervention today. There's also, even to an extent, a misconception that once this is done, then the problem is solved, but it's not, and there's a need to manage that. And I'll speak to that on the challenges. But we've been able to coordinate this to make sure that this process moves fast enough, but to get the right quality of information that would inform and help in planning. The fact that it's a joint scoping mission is also useful. There are three different was led by the government, but three different institutions here, different mandates, but working together towards a common goal, and each with his own strength and area of expertise, which is very useful to one, conducting the assessment, and I'm sure will be very useful as we move forward in this. There's also the strong sense of ownership by the federal government and the state government, and this has also helped in moving this process forward. And again, referring to the president of the World Bank earlier this morning, is also speaking to conflict analysis, and this being the basis for, or a backbone rather, for the RPBA to be able to come up with strategic outcomes and prioritize the interventions there. And of course, not forgetting our cross-cutting issues, which is across the three different components. Now, some of the challenges that we face, we've fortunately been able to address them, but these are the things that would will come out as lessons learned as well. And one is the fact that it's in crisis, so it's making sure that the assessment is dynamic, it's fluid, and we understand that. And with that at the back of our mind is to make sure that the model can be easily adaptable. Data collection in hard-to-reach areas, we have employed remote sensing to support that. And also the fact that it's one assessment report, not quite one, but one assessment report to reflect the realities across the 6 different states. But the way the report will be presented would take into consideration the differences in the different states. So those state reports would also be available, while we have one synthesis report that would be that's more or less the harmonized recovery strategy for the region. Moving from needs, of course, to priorities, and that's something that we've also been able to do by plugging the needs into what the strategic outcomes would be for the recovery process. And one other thing that was interesting, well, apart from the fact that we had short time and we had to visit 6 states to conduct the field mission, so more resources were deployed in getting more teams out to actually visit the states. So these were steps that were taken simultaneously as opposed to one after the other. Another challenge was managing the expectations, as I did mention earlier. So we've been able to, because people expect results immediately, this is an assessment, and they expect that, you know, the World Bank is here, they're bringing in tons of money, and our problems are all solved. But we've actively engaged the stakeholders in helping them understand this. Another thing is also working using media, both traditional and new media, to communicate the process so people know what we're doing, when we're doing it, and how. So we've been able to manage that so that there will be some empathy, if you'd like, because there's an understanding of what exactly it is that we're doing and how we're doing it. So strategic communication is important. In terms of the emerging lessons learned, we went through a 7-step validation process. And these steps were very important in keeping all our stakeholders, all the key players together and, working on the same page. So engaging the key players from the beginning through the scoping mission, the inaugural workshop. So there's a sense of ownership all the way down to the last one we just had, which is the technical meeting where we shared with them the preliminary findings and the recovery strategies, and of course got their feedback, and we're now working on the reports, which would also have a validation meeting where we'd work and share this material with the state governments, the federal government, and the key players in this, and have a consensus building before we finalize our reports. Again, very important is getting that report, but more importantly is using that report and having the resources and the capacity to actually use it properly. So thank you. I think I have tried not to go over. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Masha. Our next panelist is Mr. William Chernish. Is the head of the state agency for Ukraine for Donbas recovery since June 26th of 2015. He's an expert on anti-money laundering and financing of terrorism. From 1994 to 2000, he has worked in the bank as a senior lawyer, inspector of banking security. From 1998 to 2001, he was a lecturer of law, and since 1999, he has been working as a practicing lawyer. As a public official, Mr. Chernish served as deputy head of the Kirovgrad Regional State Administration in 2005 and became the head of the Regional State Administration in 2006, between 2006 and 2007. He has shortly become member of the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine. He was the deputy, from 2014 to 2015, Mr. Chernish headed a non-governmental organization, Center for Security Studies and the Anti-Money Laundering. Mr. Chernish graduated from the Kharkov National Law Academy in 1999. He is the second-rank civil servant. Mr. Chernish holds awards of the State Committee for Communication, the Central Election Commission, and the Ministry of Emergency Situation of Ukraine. Mr. Chernish.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. You have done a lot of my job because we have the same situation with RPA in Ukraine. At the request of the government of Ukraine, UN, World Bank, and EU launched a recovery and peacebuilding assessment in late 2014. Practically the same component we have in that RPA. In August in 2015, the government of Ukraine recognized this RPA as an official document and as a recommendation for all central and regional and local authorities in order to take into account in their preparing local, regional, and state plans for recovery. As for me, that is unique assessment. That document is very important. There are three components, as I told before: restoring critical infrastructure and social services, promoting economic recovery, and strengthening social resilience, peacebuilding, and community security. And at the same time, we have some problems in Ukraine with implementing of this RPA. We have a problem with adopting this RPA in accordance with the Ukrainian law. We have a kind of pyramid in Ukraine. We have a parliamentary presidential republic, so we need to have a law, and we have the law about national and foreign policy. So in accordance with that law, Cabinet of Ministers, the government of Ukraine should create a policy in different areas to be implemented by other central authorities, including my authority, the State Agency for Donbass Recovery. So we need to, initially, we need to have a special amendment to the law or special provisions within the law, then the governmental order about policy, and then the agency and other central authorities should implement those policy at different levels. So the first problem is we haven't gone through all procedures within the country. Now we initiated a special state program, and we use RPA as a basis for creating this program, for elaborating this such program. We started this process with World Bank a couple of weeks ago with the NGOs, Ukrainian and international, with UN agencies, UNDP and others, with Ukrainian central agencies and ministries. What I feel that we still have lack of coordination. So another our proposals to the government is to create a special council to coordinate all efforts at governmental level, but I feel lack of coordination not only within the government but between three different levels: national, regional, and local. And of course between different international actors in Ukraine. This is very important mission to coordinate all efforts in order to facilitate and to create a kind of platform for discussion between different actors. Another problem is lack of appropriate and reliable information about situation. Again, even people that took part in our last meeting with World Bank from local communities asked me about statistics at their level. Because they don't have comprehensive information even at their level. Our registering system for IDPs, for example, is inefficient. We don't have the registry, only databases from different regions, exchanging information between central authorities. So we do not have comprehensive information in order to use it in planning and programming. I think current statistical system in Ukraine doesn't suit for the crisis. So we need to change at the same time this collecting system to get more reliable information. It's difficult to generate the political will to advance peace building in recovery efforts while the conflict continues right now. It's very difficult to explain people, especially politicians, that we need to start peace building programs, especially in your contact line in some communities with a huge amount of IDPs from non-government control areas. They have a lot of relatives and friends within non-government control areas, they move from across contact line several times a week. They speak to each other, and a lot of Ukrainian politicians see them not as their IDPs, but as a providers of dangerous information and ideology from non-government control areas. Sometimes it's very difficult to explain that we need to start a development program because they don't have they would like to register because they can get something from the government, social payments, benefits, etc. But in reality, we need to create jobs for them, all conditions for livelihoods, etc. If we are talking about humanitarian response plan for this year, it aims in non-government control areas and local communities near contact line, approximately 5 kilometers far from contact line. But other communities don't have any humanitarian support, any humanitarian assistance right now. So we need to create additional tools to help them. At the same time, we have decentralization process in Ukraine. It's difficult to explain people that they're at their level, they're responsible for all development programs without money from the state budget, on responsibility without finance. And so it's crucial for us to establish modern financial mechanism to support communities, especially in post-conflict, within post-conflict territories. We are thinking and we have been discussing with our international partners establishing a multi-partner trust fund as a mechanism to support local communities and projects within those communities to build confidence to the central government. But in my opinion, community-based approach should be implemented and with our international partners as with Ukrainian NGOs. NGOs in Ukraine are very, very active, even proactive, and they try to be represented at different levels. So we have national NGOs. They try to centralize the process of taking part in our discussion about recovery and peacebuilding, but we rely on our partners from at different levels, NGO at community levels, regional, etc. At the same time, very important for us to monitor the situation. Again, we don't have a very good system for monitoring the process, so we need to create this, and we have some ideas with our partners how to do that. Especially big problem for us having in some communities 3 groups of people: former combatants, IDPs from regions like Donetsk and Lugansk, and host communities. Of course, in some communities we see very high level of combatants from Ukrainian militaries, and at the same time IDPs from those two regions where separatists dominate. So we need special programs how to solve such problems at community levels, and of course to understand what we should do. That's why we need a new assessment to get more information from the field and update our RPA during the process. And very crucial is to coordinate our efforts between humanitarian society, in my opinion, and the development society. A lot of projects start within humanitarian response plan, and crucial for us to understand that for example, such projects started properly, based on 3B principles, and we have some lack of information about humanitarian organization, about efforts that they made to help our people. So exchanging of information between humanitarian society and within early recovery cluster and development organization and agency is crucial in order to understand the situation better and to update RPA in the future. I think that's it.
Thank you very much. And now over to our partner, Mr. Stan Nikwan, who is the Chief Policy and Planning Division, United Nations Development Program, Special Advisor of the Bureau for Policy and Program Support. From 2000 to 2003 to 2005, he was a resident representative of UNDP in Bangui, Central African Republic, which also entailed the functions of the resident coordinator, and after the country was declared a humanitarian emergency in 2005, that of a humanitarian coordinator. He was therefore the senior-most UN official in the Central African Republic. He was notable for attracting attention to the humanitarian emergency in the country, which he called a forgotten emergency. So over to you, Stan. I would please request you to try and respond to some of both the lessons and the positives, but also the challenges faced on the PCNA process. Thank you, Stan.
Thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, and thanks to the two presenters. I think they've given us, a lesson of what the reality of assessments in post-crisis situations actually is. Now, what I'll try to do is just give you some information about the framework, the partnership that has been created at global level to support these exercises, that has brought together, the World Bank, the EU, and the UN to support governments in undertaking these kinds of very complex exercises. Since 2008, in addition to the two examples that we've just heard, we have today assessments that are currently ongoing or that have been completed in other countries as well, like Gaza, Georgia, Lebanon, Libya, northern Mali, Pakistan, Yemen. And in each of these situations, each of these countries, the situation is different. There are commonalities in terms of the kinds of issues faced, but also they are context-driven because each situation is different, in nature. Since 2008, the PCNA, the Post-Conflict Needs Assessment Instrument, has been sort of the platform where the World Bank, the EU, and the UN have come together to assist governments in undertaking these assessments. But also, since 2008, as we all know, a lot has changed in terms of the nature of conflicts, the nature of crisis. And so this instrument, over time, has garnered a number of lessons. And recently taking into consideration these changes in the environment, the three partners decided to undertake an independent review of the PCNA, the Post-Conflict Needs Assessment instrument, to look at the methodology, to look at the approach in conflict-related settings, and to try and ensure some practical changes to make it more relevant and more, and more practical. I mean, the issue was we had this template from the get-go, which was pretty elaborate in terms of how you would apply it in post-conflict settings to undertake an assessment. But there was a need to sort of try and cut it down. What was really essential? Were we spending too much time on process? Were we actually getting to the real issues that needed to be resolved? And so this independent assessment came up with a number of findings. First, it confirmed the fact that the three partners, as we all know, who are major partners in post-crisis settings, the World Bank, the EU, and the UN, together can drive quite a lot in terms of policy and supporting government. So this was reaffirmed, that if the three partners actually stay together and work together to support assessment and planning in post-conflict settings, there was a lot of potential for it to succeed. Some of the examples that you've heard are part of this success. This type of success. It also confirmed that with the changing nature of the conflicts that I've referred to in the world, it is impossible for such assessments to wait for the end of conflict. Now, we're calling them post-conflict needs assessments. But it's very difficult in many instances to determine when the conflict is ended and when you're in the post-conflict. That linearity is never the reality on the ground. And so in many instances, you have to start acting while the conflict is still going on. And I think in the two examples that you've heard, this is more and more the reality now. And so we need to adapt to that. So in actual conflict settings, you will be dealing already with a number of issues that go a little bit beyond the humanitarian and start to look at development in those settings. And this brings us back to the ongoing discussion about linking the humanitarian and the development nexus in crisis settings. The review also it confirmed as well that there were some pitfalls if we limited these type of exercises to just complex conflict environments. Because in the past, we've used them for those complex environments, and we've come up with really complex solutions as well that have sometimes ended up on the shelves. There's so much happening that we need to be able to adapt them so as to help governments and national stakeholders get better prepared for post-conflict settings. So in a sense, again, so much development-related work will be happening in active conflict settings. So there were a number of suggestions that a review made, which already I think we've started to apply to the two examples that we've heard. But others involve more a high-level involvement in the three institutions. Because for a long time, this instrument became sort of a working-level instrument, and in the three organizations, we would work and agree on things, but there was never a guarantee that, since many of these instances in post-conflict settings are highly political, and you need high-level engagement in each organization to be able to engage politically, it was important to ensure that in the three organizations, that kind of high-level commitment would be attained. And so it was suggested to establish a high-level advisory group that can discuss, approve as appropriate some of the policy and guidance of this instrument and make it even more effective. So this advisory group is, in fact, going to be meeting for the first time tomorrow here in DC. A suggestion as well to change the name of the instrument. We're calling it the Post-Conflict Needs Assessment. Post-conflict already doesn't make any sense. So as you can see from the Nigeria example, our Nigerian colleague can probably confirm that this name evolved. Initially, the government had a different name, but when the four partners, because this is actually a quadripartite partnership, it's the three organizations plus the government of the country concerned. So when that discussion happened, it was decided then to call it the Peacebuilding and Recovery Assessment, and it was so fitting that I think it's probably the name that will eventually need to be adopted, because that is a reality of it. It's a peace building and recovery assessment. It can happen, doesn't matter the timing, as long as some of the opportunities are there. So the change of name is happening to take account of that reality. Also suggested that we should draw on tools that have proven their worth in other assessment processes, and so not continually reinvent tools along the way. And there were a number of these. For example, the damage and loss assessments that the World Bank is very good at, the remote sensing, and the economic impact methodologies. Some of these drawing from the strengths of the three institutions, the bank, the UN, and the EU, pulling together these, these tools. And why not even looking at some of the assessment methodologies that the humanitarians have been using as we try and bring together the humanitarian development. We see what has been useful in each of these different settings and make sure we have a really effective and practical approach. But there may be still need for further guidance. And so we are thinking also seriously about that, including issuing some form of standard operating principles that can actually clarify how we use this, this instrument and adapt it to a given situation, and then it makes it more predictable across the three organizations and the government concerned, that we have clarity on where we are going. Also, there is a need for country-level replication of this partnership. What has been recognized is that while at the global level, the three organizations would agree on a lot of their approaches and methodologies, it was always sort of responding to a crisis. But it's important to sort of be proactive, because if you are already present in a country, because these three organizations are present in almost every developing country. And so why wait for a crisis to happen before you come together and start initiating an assessment process? So there is a suggestion that while, in non-conflict settings, even in non-crisis settings, these three partners should already be working with the government to get them better prepared, to strengthen preparedness for, to be able to support the government when finally, there is a crisis that happens. And recognize also the importance of getting these processes right in the midst of very complex political and security efforts, and building on the experiences that have been shared today by the two colleagues. That we are never going to be getting these processes going in peaceful situations. In fact, we can prepare for them in peaceful situations, but to get them going, we need to be ready to be working in very complex settings. And also to try and ensure that the synergies with other relevant processes, because other than the process that the bank, the EU, and the UN have in place, there are other partners that are working on other processes that are linked or connected in the area of peace building. There are a number of them out there. We can talk about them during the discussion to connect to this and ensure some synergies for better effectiveness, and also help ensure that governments are not dealing with multiple processes and multiple partners at the same time, and sometimes with very limited capacity in most cases. Finally, really, really important that national ownership is ensured from the very beginning. I think that these two examples show us how important this is. Now, without the kind of national ownership or even the national leadership we had in Ukraine and in Nigeria, the leadership that the government has demonstrated throughout from the beginning to the end, this process doesn't go anywhere. And also needs to be very inclusive, because it's nationally owned doesn't mean it's government owned. Because we know the nature of conflict, we know we need civil society, we saw the cross-cutting areas that the presentation from Nigeria showed. It's important that when we talk about national ownership, that all the different components of society are included. So we believe that peace building and recovery assessment is a unique tool actually for conflict response. It helps us identify and give priority to the underlying causes of conflict. All of the most recent work going on now internationally, especially at the UN, emphasizing prevention, but also emphasizing the importance of analyzing the true causes of conflict. if you just step in and start acting without knowing what the true triggers of a conflict are, we are sure to provide the wrong solutions. So they've shared with us their first-hand experiences on this, and on behalf of the EU, the UN, and the World Bank, we are, all of us, reconfirming our commitment to continue working on this instrument. We think it has great potential. It's not perfect. We are continuing with the next phase of this review to make sure that the methodology, we get it right and get it as flexible as possible, and that we can continue to strengthen this partnership in working with governments that need support in post-conflict settings. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Stan. We're nearly running out of time, but I think that it's important to probably go over a few, maybe 10 minutes for questions and from the floor. Yeah.
Just to mention that colleagues from the bank, the EU, and the UN are part of the audience, and so they will be able to answer questions as well.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. I am Right Honorable Stellangu, a parliamentarian from Nigeria. I'm at the House of Representatives. I want to use this opportunity to thank the World Bank Group for organizing this beautiful event, and the good work you have been doing in terms of running to countries that have problems, including mine. I listened with rapt attention what my sister, her presentation, and the wonderful work her office is doing. But I have a question. I don't know whether you are thinking about legislative framework that will enable you carry out your responsibilities in the Northeast. I say this because at the advent of the 8th Assembly, which started in June last year, the Speaker of the House, Right Honorable Yakubu Dogara, created a new committee on IDPs to take care of legislative framework that will enable the federal government to solve the problems of IDPs and reconstruct the Northeast. So I don't know whether you are collaborating with them. If not, like the last speaker said, that there's need for all the stakeholders to be part and parcel of what we are doing to make sure that we get to somewhere. So if you are not, I would recommend that you look for the committee. I can give you contact of the chairman of that committee, because you need to work together to make sure that this problem of the Northeast is solved. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Excellency. Dr. Marshall?
Question, or should I respond?
No. Why don't we take a few more questions? Go ahead, please.
Oh, no, I was gonna
Okay.
pass the microphone.
Okay. Who's? No? Okay, go ahead.
Just a quick, my name's Holly Benner, work with the World Bank, and I just had kind of two quick questions. I work on the Ukraine team, and I guess the first question is, in terms of the relationship between the three institutions, certainly there's a big divergence in terms of mandates, whether they're political, development, security, and I just wonder, one issue we had in the final stages of the Ukraine RPA is sort of negotiating the final language, and obviously there were, it's a different approach taken by the EU versus the bank versus the UN. So how do you kind of navigate that discussion among the three institutions, and whether there's been any discussions of that in terms of next steps on the tool? And second, when I sort of came on board and inherited the RPA, one big challenge we had was on the implementation side, and Asbjorn was on the other side of many of my calls about what are the lessons of actually translating the assessment into an institutional setup and into financing and into an actual recovery plan. And there wasn't a lot of great experience that was ready-made in terms of lessons from other places on making that transition and operationalizing the assessment. And so I think the extent to which a revised tool can really take on board from the outset what would be the recommendations for the institutional setup and financing strategy for carrying the assessment results forward would be really important. And so I just hope that's also another, in the next iteration of the tool, that comes up as well.
Thank you, Holly. Another question.
Hi, my name is Yelena Chich, and I work with the Canadian Foreign Affairs Ministry. I'm curious as to whether any of the lessons that have been found for the tool can be translated to the way donors work internally.
Yes, I'm Alexander Mark. I'm the Chief Specialist for Conflict and Fragility here at the bank. What was interesting is those two cases you still have conflict going on. As the discussant was saying, this is probably the majority of the cases now. I think Colombia is actually really in the framework of a total peace agreement, but I think in Mali it's also in conflict. So, but I still see a relatively strong twist on this post-conflict element into the program. So how you bring donors to sort of design development policy that actually bring peace, and how they're actually intervening in a framework where you need to build peace as much as you need to do reconstruction. I wonder how much this can be brought in, because this is really the changing nature of the conflict in the modern world, right? So we are arriving in a place where we'll need to sort of build peace while conflict is going on and so on. So it's a question more about who's thinking more on the strategy around those PCNA and whether this is in the agenda.
Thank you. I am Mrs. Diallo Aisha Touré from Mali, chairman for Foreign Affairs Committee. So I know we have an assessment after many months of negotiation. So as Honorable Stable from Nigeria says, we have a lot of difficulty to make implementation, to implement it. What can we collaborate together to make it effective? Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Any other questions? Okay. If not, oh, go ahead.
Thank you very much. We've listened to wonderful presentations, and even in the previous discussion, I just wanted to maybe make a comment, because before I heard that there were representatives from South Sudan, and since we are talking about fragility, I have never heard something about South Sudan, knowing the situation that is very fragile and tense there. So I wonder whether it was not featured in the program, or if something can be said about that. Thank you very much, as a way forward.
Thank you, madam.
I'm Sabina Dario Lokolong, member of the National Assembly, South Sudan.
Thank you.
Yes, Oscar Fernandez Taranco from the Peacebuilding Support Office, and I think this new methodology and this new rebranding, if you will, as a peacebuilding instrument is quite important to capture exactly the challenges we have going forward, and the fact that peace building in the midst of ongoing conflict is extremely political. It is about strategizing. It's about identifying the priorities. What is it that is going to start reconciling the societies? What is it that's going to address the roots of the conflict? And so I think the big distinction from the past is we kept waiting for the conflicts to end to do what ended up being a massive identification of needs, which was very unwieldy, and for which, you know, huge budgets were identified and never actually delivered, and creating huge frustrations. This hopefully addresses the issue of strategy, of prioritization and sequencing, and leaving that more technical and detailed discussion to align behind the strategy. This is usually the most difficult aspect of any intervention during, before, during, and after a conflict. So if we can get three key institutions that work with the government, the UN, the EU, and the bank, to agree on the common strategy and the prioritization and the sequencing, then we can actually address the issue of politics, the issue of building trust, the issue of building legitimacy, the issue of building credibility, and have the sense of what needs to be done first, second, and third, because otherwise there is a dispersion of efforts and a competition actually for attention. So I think the most important thing going forward is that this is a partnership, a more coherent partnership to work with governments who are actually facing dramatic circumstances, either before, during, or after the conflict. So hopefully this prevention, this conflict analysis is brought in a more meaningful manner so that we know where we need to focus. Part of the past PCNAs were very unfocused, and it was more about managing these huge missions that used to land in whatever country that had to, suffer from this presence and try to make sense of it, to a much more strategic, a much more coherent. And this means that both governments and these entities need to do their homework beforehand and not just deploy and figure out what is the problem. I think this requires much more coherence at our level of headquarters and field, so that we don't disperse and disseminate, how can I say, that we focus on priorities. Thank you.
Thank you, Oscar.
Yes, my name is Munyaradzi Motsi. I'm with the UN mission in Liberia, but I'm here in my personal capacity. I just wanted to ask, usually when you have these joint initiatives, one of the problems is funding. Do you have a basket fund, or how do you finance this joint initiative? And secondly, I just wanted to know whether Stan talked about a review and a new terminology to describe what is happening. Is there literature available somewhere for documents that can be accessed on this? Thank you.
Okay, there are quite a few questions on the review, on the process. So do you want to take? And I think Oscar has already responded to a couple of things, but please feel free to.
He preempted. I was going to call on him to answer all of the questions, but he preempted. Fortunately, I'm just a spokesperson. We have colleagues here from the three agencies, so please feel free to step in. But anyway, there was an internal internal discussion, Nigerian discussion there as well. I mean, the question about negotiating the final language in terms of the mandate, it will always be there. I mean, I don't know in terms of bank staffing, what category is the largest? Your technical staff or your lawyers? I don't know. But I hear there's some competition there, which means these are institutional issues that we just have to clarify. And fortunately, we are making really great strides. I think we have on Friday, Saturday, we have this the UN World Bank discussion on the partnership. So it's part of an ongoing process. And when you are dealing with a conflict situation that is eminently political, I mean, for example, we just did a mine action mission to Ukraine. Recently, it's not even about negotiating language. We're not even sure if the report is going to get published, for starters. So we did a technical mission, yes, but none of that is happening in a political vacuum. So you can just imagine already at the country level how highly political this is. And Oscar was talking about the preeminence of the political. We cannot avoid it. We have to find a way to address that. So yes, but in the next iteration, I think the more we work together, what we're trying to do now, moving forward at least, is to agree on what the essential things are that need to get done. And we can only do that through practice and then getting it right. How to make sure that we actually operationalize it. There was an element on one of the slides from our Nigerian colleague about making sure that report doesn't stay on the shelf. The tendency in the past has been that these processes have been so heavy that by the time you get to the end of it, you just, finally, it's like you've accomplished your mission and you're just happy to get it over with and move on. So it's an event that starts in the response and then the report, and then it's so heavy, everybody's tired, and then you move on. So, but I think that the new approach that we're trying to work on, to design, is to get as practical as possible and link it to actual action later on. And that is why it's important to make the task easier for governments, to keep the governments and the countries themselves in the driving seat. So you're having that commitment. Very important discussion now between the presidency and the Parliament of Nigeria as to, okay, because you need both of them. The money has to come from somewhere. It has to be voted by Parliament. So this is already happening in Nigeria. It's supposed to happen in other countries where you actually can have a guarantee that because the country itself is in the driver's seat, you are sure that this can get implemented. There was a question about the tools versus the way donors work. Well, we're dealing with templates all the time. So because each donor is going to have its own approach, its own guidelines for funding and everything else, and those different approaches sometimes clash. But what we forget is that when a crisis is going to happen, it doesn't consult each and every partner to find out if the tools that we have are going to be good enough to solve it. It happens independently of what you think or what this donor or that donor thinks. So it's incumbent upon us as partners to understand that and to make sure that we need to adapt our processes to the actual nature of the crisis. I didn't mention the fact how important it is for this to be context-driven to what the specific needs of a country are. And there are several initiatives that are ongoing now. There's been much talk about the New Deal and the fragility and the need to be less risk averse, because the risk of not intervening is always bigger than the risk of actually intervening when it actually happens. So hopefully, as these three partners, we believe have the potential to have some influence on how the donors work, and we're hoping that part of the revision of this instrument going forward can help resolve some of that. Building peace in conflict, I think I mentioned that. I think we're just going to learn it by doing, because we understand that that is what is happening out there now. That recognition is the first step of it. Well, about South Sudan, I think we cannot stop talking about it. Even when we're not talking about South Sudan, we're thinking about South Sudan, and I think we all understand, we know the progress, the peace process there. The New Deal, we're hoping that we can revive it at some point and move forward. Funding from our Liberia colleague, I don't think there is. The funding, the nature of the funding mechanisms out there hasn't actually changed. It's not as if new pots of money are attached directly to this. So it's not, that is not yet, but there's discussions on funding, whether you're taking it from Addis now to the humanitarian funding discussions and everything. A lot of discussion is happening as to how you can actually change the nature of funding for crisis settings, but there is no specific funding attached to this particular initiative. And the literature, of course, there's the review report, which is I think is a public document, if colleagues can confirm that, and we could share that. And as we go forward and revise the methodology, that also is going to become available for everybody. Colleagues, please, if you want to add something.
Before I turn it out to the colleagues, so why don't we give an opportunity for the panelists to respond to some of the questions.
Okay, I'd like to thank you, Right Honourable Stella, for your not just your question, but the inputs, because you're right, there is a need for the engagement of all the key players. There's no way that the executive alone can do this, and there's a need to engage the legislative arm. And I would follow up with you on the contacts with for the IDP committee. But just to also share that the Northeast Caucus has actually been engaging with our office, and we're also aware of the bill for the commission, and these are post issues that are being discussed in terms of how there are some of the things that we'll consider when it comes to how the implementation and the institution that would implement the plan going forward, how this will work with the Presidential Committee on Northeast Interventions by the President, how it will work together with that whole commission. But these are discussions that we're having internally and would be things that would be useful to have one common path, if you like, as to how this would work out. And also useful to know that this process is something that must be done, well, should be done, it's being done. It's technical, it would support all the interventions that are ongoing. If you notice when in the slide, we did refer to some of the interventions that are ongoing. I didn't mention any being done by the legislative arm, but it's also good to know that. But this is something that would speak to supporting those ongoing interventions, because those, as we said, that there's still a huge humanitarian need, and the committee that you mentioned also speaks to that. But this would also help provide a clearer path, if you like, because it will help in terms of determining what the priorities are, what the needs are, how we sequence intervention. So it will be very useful for such a committee. And it's something that would, when we move to the next phase, which is what we'll be doing this month, the validation process, once the reports are ready, we'll be sharing this with all the relevant players, and it would be useful to also engage the National Assembly on that. So thank you very much for that.
I'd like to support the idea about peace building during the conflict. I think we need to understand the situation, and we need, in reality, in Ukraine, I feel it and my colleagues feel it, that we need a special strategy during a conflict. I would call even this early peace building, something like that, because we need something to do during a conflict to create a basis for next effort to reach peace. So I support that idea. Thank you.
Team members, do you want to respond very quickly? Please. Yeah, we'll wrap it up. Anyone wants to take a minute from your team? No? Okay. If not, thank you very much. First things at least from our side, certainly from the World Bank, there's a huge commitment to continue to strengthen this partnership, and more importantly, to work with our clients, with keeping them. I think you made a very, very important point, both of you. The kind of the leadership of the government is absolutely critical for these things to work. So again, thank you so much to all of you. And entertainment is served upstairs, I guess. Music.